Now, let's dive into the topic itself. Faisal, would love to start with you to better understand the importance of this topic today and maybe some foundational insight on DORA.
Yeah, for sure. So to start, DORA, it's the acronym. It stands for Digital Operational Resilience Act, and it's a EU regulation designed to enhance that ability of financial institutions to really weather and recover from any information technology related disruptions. Think cyber attacks, think data breaches, system failures. It's really to build that tolerance for themselves so that they're protected in the event one of those things would happen. The requirements of DORA not only applies to those financial institutions, but it's a bit of a rain down trickle effect to the service providers, third-party service providers that support these institutions themselves, because those financial institutions, they rely on those third-party service providers. The goal is ultimately to minimize disruption risk in those financial services across the EU. Now, prior context that I'd love to add here is pre-DORA. All right, if we think about the guidelines for managing compliance pre-DORA, rather for security and technology risk purposes, uh, the requirements were managed at the EU member state level and not the countrywide regulatory level. And implicitly, a lot, if we think about that, even not even countrywide, but really regulation wide, right? If we think about the process and compliance management orientation for operational resilience at that point in time, there's not really like one set of standard way to do things, because each EU member state had their own way of going about it. And that's what warranted that need to have strong centralization and unification of requirements. And that ultimately birthed DORA to now exist. With that, I do want to emphasize some key dates. DORA was originally proposed in by the EU in 2020, and then further adopted in as final text and regulation around the December 2022 timeframe. It then got published into EU's official journal and entered into force starting in January 2023. And just as of a couple of months ago, it's fully in effect, which was the expectation of it when it got put into force to begin with. Another supporting factor that I like to touch on is the policy sets and publications called the RTS and ITS. RTS, it stands for Regulatory Technical Standards, and they're essentially what organizations must do to comply with various parts of the DORA regulation. But when we read the RTS and these policy packets, they were published sometime into 2024. And if we read the RTS and the what and what it includes, it tends to be on the broader side in some aspect of things. And that's when the ITS comes into play. ITS, it stands for Implementing Technical Standards. It explains really how to implement the RTS relative to the DORA requirements at the end of the day. A good synergy to kind of think through. What I like to talk to my customers about is overlap and comparison to ISO 27001 and ISO 27002. For those not familiar with 27001, it's an industry standard framework for the development of an InfoSec program according to what the requirements that ISO outlines for security management systems. ISO 27002 is that document that guides the implementation of controls in that standard. And that's essentially the concept of RTS and ITS with DORA, where ITS informs RTS to explain how they might implement some of those requirements. Finally, let's talk through the who needs that part. And the general answer that I'll start with is that if you're an organization operating in the financial sector of the EU, you must be compliant with DORA. In DORA's Article 2, it outlines some very specific types of organizations in the financial sector, which one of them being one broader classification called ICT third party providers. As mentioned, ICT services, broad definition, but it's generally meant to focus on network and information systems that those financial institutions use and rely on for their own resilience. So if we think about the ripple effect that we were talking about earlier in DORA, it's not only the institutions, but the third party services that they're using for themselves. And without those third party services, it may be a medium impact, it could be high impact. And that starts to differentiate in the sphere of normal third party ICT providers and critical third party providers known as CTPPs. When we think about DORA compliance applicability, though, you should already know based on the services and roles with your financial institutions whether you need to be DORA compliant today because it's already in effect and enforced. But if you're up and coming, you'll know pretty quickly whether it's by virtue of you, the type of industries you're serving to, the services that you're providing, or the clients that you serve today or are about to serve, and the contracts that they're going to have for you saying you must be DORA compliant. And with that, I'm going to take a pause here. Methan, anything you'd add there?
So for the people in the audience, they have to comply with DORA right now if it applies to them, I guess, because that deadline has already passed, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.